Charlene, thank you so much. And the Opal organization, the Opal group, for having me today as I begin to talk about inclusive leadership and how we need to expect the unexpected. I think that's the theme for 2020. And as we're going into 2021, expecting the unexpected and really flexing our ability to lead differently. Um, as Charlene mentioned, I am currently the leader of diversity and inclusion at Anthem. But I also am, really just motivated and innovative. And it's for me, a purpose to be in this role in diversity and inclusion and to offer insights and to create spaces for learning and growing and developing and leveraging how our differences can make all of us better. I do believe that, inclusion and our diversity not only makes us individually better or smarter, but it makes all of us brighter. And so the more that we can expose ourselves to difference, the more that we can lead in a different way and build talent, the better off we're going to be ourselves as well as the organizations that we serve. And so as we get into talking about inclusive leadership today, the first thing that I wanted us to focus on is really how our inclusion has how the impact of COVID and racial trauma has impacted our ability to include and really how it's impacted our lives. You may see, different generation impacts have surfaced where younger generations, as it relates to COVID-19, saw more of a silver lining than our older generations, our parents, saw during COVID-19. The same for the racial trauma. I think that was an opportunity for a lot of us to bond if there was a silver lining. But it was also a period of time where we all grieved. And so thinking about the impacts of COVID and the racial trauma that we've recently experienced gives us an opportunity to think about our leadership style. So let's talk about some of the impacts that we've seen. The first one is around relationships. For some of us, we've seen isolation, and for some of us, we've seen greater bonding. So when we think about isolation, those individuals who are single, who really leveraged being with each other, both in the office and in social settings, began to feel and sense some isolation, where others were building stronger bonds with the family because we're so on the go. I know that was a case for me. I was on the go quite a bit before the pandemic hit. And this was an opportunity for me to rest and to say, wait a minute, let's stop running the rat race, but let's focus on family. I had more time for that and to rest and really enjoying my family. And so relationships in some cases suffered because we were not together, but it created a deeper desire to be with each other. We saw different things in finances. Some individuals were able to save money, but many felt financial strain. And as you think about the Black and brown populations in the US, those individuals who were working on the front line saw most of the pain from a financial perspective. And I think, with all of the unemployment rates that we saw and our government really trying to help and save many people from, just financial ruin, we all saw things in a very different light. Politics and society. I think that, this study that I gathered a lot of this data from the Pew Research Center indicated that most entirely negative responses from politics and society. And that, is related to a lot of what we saw after the murder of George Floyd and how our country handled the murder of George Floyd. Like I said, the silver lining of that was that you saw a lot of people coming together and bonding and creating this allyship that was very, very strong. But then on the other hand, there was a lot of despair of why this is even happening. Why are Black and Asian even community members experiencing such violence and hate? And so that also was a dynamic that we were dealing with. Social activities were disrupted, our routines were disrupted, and some of us found new hobbies as a result of all of this. We had to dig deeper and identify ways that we could, function basically function. And I'm not going to say excel, but basically function in a time of such turmoil that we experienced in 2020. In this period of time, decided to get a dog. I have, 2 teenagers and a man child. A 25-year-old son is what I call him. And I decided to get a dog. And this would be the 3rd dog that I've had in my lifetime. And why not go big? So I got a Great Dane. And, he is my new hobby, training him, educating him, and just really bonding with my 150-pound puppy has been a new social activity and routine that I've had. And as I did with the kids, I found friends through the puppy. So as we go to the dog park, so we're finding new social activities. Work-life balance has also been an area that, we need to focus on. And some people have seen improved work-life balance, and others have seen a disappearance in work-life balance. For those of us who, are working from home, the boundaries that we created for work and life all of a sudden disappeared. The time that we spent in the car driving to and from our offices no longer existed. And so we had to, we're seeing how, work-life balance is beginning to blend, yet others have found more of a balance because they're able to spend more time at home and less, in travel and transit to one place or the other. And then last, but certainly not least, one of the areas I think that is, most underrated as we're talking about, the impact of 2020 is health. So, the loss of loved ones. I mean, and I don't think that anyone doesn't have at least 1 to 2 degrees of a person who has passed away from COVID. Many people are experiencing depression, declining physical health, balanced by relatively few positives. A research just came out indicating that 76% of employees, managers responded to a survey, 76% of these managers indicated that their employees are struggling with work-life balance. They're struggling with mental health and needing to take time off for mental health. And they're also reporting that there's an all-time low usage of PTO, personal time off, and usage of vacation. A lot, attributed to the limited travel abilities that we have today, but a lot of it is around going back to the work-life balance. And if you can't do anything else, you might as well work. And so that is causing a lot of trauma in our workforce. It's causing all of our leaders to think differently about how we lead. And if we think about the different leadership styles, we're all beginning to see, now, wait a minute, how do I do this? How do I make my, new post-COVID leadership style work? And so that's what we're going to talk about. But let's talk about some of the traditional leadership styles. So we have the bureaucratic and the hierarchical and the duty focused, and thinking about new hybrid work styles and new flexibility that we're beginning to see from our leaders. How is this leadership style, if it's your style, going to work? And then getting into, going forward. And then getting into the next style, which is more visionary. So progress focused and inspirational. So now this leadership style is more looking in the future. How are we going to see our company, our division, how are we going to achieve our goals, and really looking at progress? We have the pace setter, which is the helpful and motivational. They do the work and they say, watch me, watch how I'm doing this work, and you can follow along. You have the democratic, which is supportive and innovative, the humble and protective, the servant leader who is really focused on the individual. You have the coaching leadership style, which is more motivational. The transformational leader, which is challenging and communicative. And then you have the transactional leader, which is more performance focused. These are 8 of leadership styles. I'm sure many of you can add 2 or 3 to this list. But, in general, these are the leadership styles that we went into 2020 with, right? But what we emerged with is understanding that with each of these leadership styles, there's an inclusive leadership capability to each one of them that we're all going to need to foster. And it's really important that we think about how we're going to foster inclusive leadership and how that's going to show up and really bring forth results for our new teams. They may be the same people that we've seen in the past, but our teams are new. We're getting back into an environment where we're having to lead differently and leading new teams, even though they're the same people. A lot of what we've all experienced has changed us dramatically, and our leadership styles are going to have to change as well. So when we think about inclusive leadership capabilities, the first one is to be self-aware. And I put this little comment down below, and be totally honest with yourself about yourself. And this is where I think emotional intelligence comes into play. That self-awareness is so very critical. At Anthem, as we were launching in our leading and listening sessions soon after the murder of George Floyd, we had trained the leader sessions. We wanted our leaders to be equipped with the right tools and the language to have authentic conversations about what was happening in our communities. And one of the first things that we said to them is that you've got to be self-aware. You've got to be totally honest with yourself about yourself. Know where you stand on different positions. Know how your upbringing and your beliefs are impacting the conversations that you're about to have about race, about social unrest, about people who may have had relatives that were, killed by law enforcement, or, relatives who were experiencing some of the anti-Asian violence that we were seeing in our country. And so you've got to figure out where you are on that spectrum and be able to reconcile that and understand how you respond in certain situations. And so that self-awareness is extremely important. The other piece of, inclusive leadership is around being humble and acknowledging what you don't know. It's really important as leaders that we, not only know ourselves, but also know what we don't know, kind of like the Pandora's box, right? And this really leads me to talk about Brené Brown and her conversations around courageous vulnerability. And it's through our own vulnerability that we can lead most effectively, is what Brené Brown indicates. And that when people see us being humble and acknowledging our shortcomings, we get more trust from people. When we hide that, when we hide what we don't know and try to create a narrative that would cover up what we don't know, we're losing trust. And we'll talk about trust and how important that is a little bit later. But being humble and acknowledging what you don't know is very important capability as we're talking about inclusive leadership. The next piece of this is being curious about others. So creating meaningful connections. And when I say being curious about others, I've had, leaders or associates who are like, I'm just very curious about you. Tell me everything about yourself. It's not being curious in a creepy way. It's being curious in a meaningful way, in an authentic way. And taking time to get to know people, not just in one setting, but over a period of time, getting to know others, getting to know about different cultures. And that requires that you spend time, we as individuals spend time, not only talking to others from different cultures, but it also requires that we're doing our own research, that we're we're investing in our knowledge of other cultures, whether it be what we're searching on the internet about different cultures, learning a different language, participating in a different festival. And at Anthem, we encourage others to become members of different BRGs other than themselves. And so being curious and respectful of those different cultures is very important as we begin to think about the people that we're working with as leaders being very intentional about learning more about the people who are around us. What this does also is it creates a certain level of social capital that you gain from people in your sphere or other people from different cultures. When you put in that time and they understand that you have a sincere interest, that increases your social capital and ability to connect naturally with others from different cultures and different backgrounds. Or even if they're on your team, you live in the same neighborhood, connecting with others who are very similar to you is very important as well. So creating those meaningful connections is just the third element of inclusive leadership capabilities. So before I go on to the next one, I'm going to make sure that we don't have any questions. Please make sure that you include your questions in the chat. I know I have approximately 10 minutes remaining because of my computer, so I'm going to get through the rest of these, but I do want to make sure we're asking some questions. And so as we think about the next element, which is listen to understand, part of what we talked about at Anthem as we were having our leading and listening sessions was to listen to understand and not to be understood. And so this focus is you're listening, you're hearing, you're not only listening for the words or what someone is saying, you're listening for their beliefs. You're listening for their values. You're listening beyond the words that you're hearing, and you're looking at body language and you're looking at and you're listening for the beliefs that are coming out in whomever is talking. We often got questions in our leading and listening sessions around, well, we had a session and the leader focused more on, one-upping them and saying, yeah, I experienced that too. And so when we're listening, it's less about us as the listener, it's more about the speaker. And so making sure that we're creating that space for people to share and to have a voice, really, and that's really the intent of what we want to accomplish when we're listening to understand. It's for us to understand and allow people to have that voice. The fifth piece is around becoming an ally. So stand up with and for those different than you. Standing up with and for those that have a different perspective, a different background, and for those who don't have a voice, who want to have a voice but cannot, because of where they are, where they're situated, cannot have a voice. And we experienced that a lot at Anthem, and we wanted to make sure that our associates who may have been suffering because of what they were seeing after the murder of George Floyd or around the anti-Asian violence that we were seeing, we wanted to have a voice. And this is where I think our organization came together strong, being allies for each other and, recognizing that we all have our struggles, but sometimes someone else's struggle might be more burdensome than yours. And what better way to lift up an entire community than to be an ally. And then last but not least, we have the flexibility, being flexible, expanding your own needs, expanding beyond your own needs and understanding. As I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, there is a lot of, assistance and that our associates, our employees are needing right now. And an inclusive leader is going to identify ways to be flexible to meet the needs of their employees or their team, and at the same time meet their objectives. And that's a unique skill. That's a very, very unique skill, but it requires all of the things that come before it. And what it also requires is a very, deep understanding of demonstrating empathy, understanding that we're all not coming from the same place. We all don't have the same backgrounds. And so we do need to take a step back and recognize the bedrock for inclusive leadership is demonstrating empathy, walking in someone else's shoes, recognizing that our actions matter and that our words matter. It's a very, very important component in a bedrock of inclusive leadership. Another bedrock of inclusive leadership is building trust. I've read a book a long time ago, but recently heard this author again, Claude Steele, who wrote the book around Whistling Vivaldi. He wrote it almost a decade ago. Very, very good book about how stereotype threat gets in the way of our own performance. If we know of a stereotype that's been placed on our demographic, whether it be gender or ethnicity and race, we tend to overcompensate for that. And we get into the space of a stereotype threat, well, where we may not perform as good as we want to perform. But what he's also saying is that and our responsibility as individuals who have stereotype threat is to, put it to the side and to not allow that to overtake our ability to perform. But what Claude also says is that it's about building trust in organizations and in environments, making sure that as a leader, I am not relying on those stereotypes. I'm not showing any indication of those stereotypes showing up in how I interact with this person. And that's a way of building trust. That's, the trust is so critically important on teams for leaders, that if you don't have it, none of these other capabilities will be effective in terms of your inclusive leadership. And at the end of the day, we recognize that we teach people the way we treat people. And I'm going to repeat that. We teach people by the way that we treat people. And I got this comment from a colleague of mine at Anthem, Siobhan, very enlightening. And I just think that as we think about inclusive leadership and our capabilities and what we can do to shift the way that we lead, no matter what your primary leadership style is, I think at the core, inclusive leadership will dictate how successful we are in leading the next generation of post-COVID, post-racial trauma employees. And so with that, I'm going to pause. And I'm getting notes that I have only 5 minutes. So I'm going to pause to see if we have any questions. And so, Charlene, are there any questions in the audience? And do we have time for at least one?
We do have time. We have 4 minutes left, so I'll try to get through. The first one that came in is from Gary, and he had asked, what role do ERGs play in empowering employees through mentoring? Mm-hmm. And do you believe that information technology can be leveraged to enable the identification and promotion of potential leaders from within an organization?
Okay, so the question was around mentorship and ARGs, the role that ARGs play in mentorship. I think that associate resource groups or employee resource groups, business resource groups, whatever you call them, have a very unique and powerful opportunity to grow and build talent in the organization. Gary, I think that's a great question. And so I believe that, in that mentoring can go both ways, right? So you may have a senior leader who would really like to tap into a different market. Why wouldn't that senior leader be mentored by an ARG, right? Around how to, learning more about that demographic, building skills around entering into that market, if you will. But I think also it's a great way for up and coming leaders to test out their skills, mm-hmm. to really hone in on their project management, their communication, speaking in front of large audiences. It's a great way for organizations to create this informal but formal way for employees to grow their skills. And so it's not always that you're going to be in a classroom developing a skill that is going to get honed. We know that 70% of growth and development happens through experience. And so the BRGs, the ARGs are about experience. And this is a great way for leaders, for emerging leaders to grow, and for existing seasoned leaders to learn more about up and coming generations and populations or markets that they're trying to tap into. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That was the first part of the question. I know there was a part around technology. Do you want to repeat that, or we can answer that later?
It mentions, do you believe that information technology could be leveraged to enable the identification and promotion of potential leaders from those ERGs and from within the organization, which I think you touched on a little bit, but if you want to expand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, so there are a couple of ways that you can do this. So mentoring tools, there are a lot of tools that are out there that can help match mentors and mentees in the organization. But I also think that as we're getting more, as organizations are implementing more robust human resource systems, they're able to do that matching as well. And associates have the ability to put their profiles into their employment record, so that the rest of the organization can do searches on your skills. And so I know that Anthem is working on implementing a new product that will help us do that, that will help us be more effective in how we are recognizing the talent that we have internally before we go external.
And your entire talk about those inclusive leadership capabilities, I mean, we're not just talking about the leaders right now. We're talking about those employees that are growing and developing and coming up, and being able to have everyone learn about those capabilities. And I think that it was very well said.